Hey everyone, appreciate you for being here. Welcome to Being Brooke, where we demolish the corporate facades of modern day business. Join us as we ride the waves of the journeys that built today's most successful executives and entrepreneurs.
It's a blue ocean.
Sorry that I haven't replied to you in weeks. I'm just busy putting out all the fires. The quickest way to climb the corporate ladder all the way to unemployment. Burn the boats. Brain rattle. If you know, you know. Entrepreneurship, where delusion is not only encouraged but required. Time off? What's that?
Just go ahead and let me in.
Morale's down? Quick, call an all-hands meeting. If anyone asks to pick my brain one more time, there will be nothing left.
Hey everybody, welcome to Being Brooke. Today we have with us Jeremiah Prummer, who is the CEO and founder of Knocommerce, which is a post-purchase survey SaaS company. Jeremiah, I really appreciate you for being here today. Can we go ahead and just start off by telling us the story of how you actually came up with the idea for Knocommerce?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and thank you for having me. I know we've chatted multiple times. I feel like these days everything is very remote. So we've actually met in person before, which is rare. So
that is rare. It's good to see you again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we do post-purchase surveys. That's kind of like the main focus of our business. There are other smaller components, but we do, probably 85 to 90% of the data that we collect is on an order confirmation screen. And so that's like the foundation ultimately of the platform that we're looking to build around customer insights. So that really was the initial goal, and the vision was to build a platform to help brands better understand who their customers are, why they buy the products they buy, and just give a different layer of insight that has not existed in the context of the e-commerce space. So there's lots of tools out there that will analyze your order data and give you some insight into what people buy, how frequently they buy them, all of those sorts of ways of looking at data. But at the end of the day, there's really not a whole lot available for brands who sell online to understand the motivations that actually drive somebody to purchase. And that ultimately was the initial vision that we set out to solve for.
Very cool. And so what was your background coming into this? Like, how were you positioned to identify and see this problem when you were coming up with the idea?
Yeah, and well, I'll take you all the way back. So
Let's do it.
I started my first startup in college. So it was 2010. We did a couple of different things, but text message marketing was the last thing that we did, and the thing that we were doing when we went out of business. And so that was a very different time. I feel like now that's kind of table stakes. Most brands are doing that. But at the time, the only people we could convince to use our technology were politicians. And so we got through an election cycle, and then when it was all said and done, we were done. So that was that business. So that was kind of my first taste of entrepreneurship. And then since then, I've been in the world of entrepreneurship in some capacity or another. So worked for a little bit at a tech company. And so I think I was one of the first 20, 25 employees or so there. So did that for a little bit. And then I started my own WooCommerce extension business in 2012, end of 2012, beginning of 2013. So that was focused on basically plugins for WooCommerce. At the time, that was kind of the hot Shopify competitor, just e-commerce platform. There was Magento, WooCommerce, and Shopify was kind of up and coming as well. And then obviously like some of the really big like enterprise ones. But that was really how I got into e-commerce. So that was 2013 really that I was doing that full time. And then I sold that in 2016 and ran my own brand for a little bit, which I just lost all my money basically. Did not go very well. And then I got into doing agency work for a little bit and worked at a SaaS company. And then we started this in 2020. So specifically for Knocommerce, we actually incubated it inside of a marketing agency. So I have a friend, his name is Pearson Crass. Pearson and I met when I was doing the WooCommerce stuff, and I think it was 2013 or 2014. So it's been pretty close to 10 years. And at the time, he was a brand owner. and I ended up doing a bunch of work on its website. And then when he launched Lunar Solar Group in early 2018, I helped him out for about a year doing web development work, basically. And the goal had always been to build a tech company together. So we didn't get there in 2018. It was, I don't know, starting any business is really hard. And you think that, especially in something like, in an agency, you look at all the cash that's coming in and you're like, okay, cool, we're going to be able to fund all these different crazy cool projects. And it just doesn't work out that way because there's so much time that also goes into it. So timing just wasn't right. And so then in 2020, when the pandemic hit, that's when we decided to launch Knocommerce. So I came back to Lunar Solar Group. We actually built it from within his agency and then split it into a separate company in 2021. We were going to, and then everything basically has happened since then, essentially. So we went to market with a prototype in 2020, basically. And then 2021 was when we really launched the business.
Very cool. I feel like behind all good entrepreneurs, there's always stories of failures and people talk about them less. So like I appreciate you sharing some of those. I'm curious, what were your biggest like lessons or takeaways that you took from those failed businesses when you were launching Knocommerce to help make it successful?
Yeah, I would say like the thing that defined my 20s as an entrepreneur was impatience. And I mean, I still definitely have a little bit of that trait, and I suppose most entrepreneurs do. That's why you become an entrepreneur, in part at least. And so I think, it's like when you're working in a company, nothing ever happens the way you want it to. Nothing ever moves as fast as you want. Even running a company, it never moves as fast as I want it to. It's never as good as I want it to be. And I think what I really struggled with in my 20s was not finding something and sticking to it long enough to actually make it work, right? And so, my business that I sold in the WooCommerce space turned into a company that did 7 figures in revenue. I would be far wealthier than I am now if I would have just stuck with that, honestly. And that was something I started when I was 21, 22. So that was I think I just learned a lot from that. And so for me, the last 3 years in particular has really looked like me fighting against that impatience and trying to push the boundaries as much as possible still, but also like stick to the core things that actually make the business run, make it work, and invest the vast majority of my time into those things.
That makes sense. That actually, so I'm curious then, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure tell me if this is not public knowledge.
Yes.
You guys have actually been acquired, correct?
Yep, that's public knowledge.
Okay, cool. I thought so. And so what was that process like? And then I'm hearing you still talk about patience. I feel like not a lot of people are familiar with how it like works. Like a lot of people will start a business without an exit strategy. So
Yeah.
you're still having patience in terms of sticking around, but what was the process of becoming acquired? And when you're talking about having patience now, what does that look like? I'm assuming it's a different kind of feel or setup from when you were the sole owner versus selling it. And so I'm just curious to hear about what that process is and what Knocommerce is like today for you after being acquired.
Yeah, I love that question. So I think so I'll just give a little bit of backstory around the acquisition too. So we incubated Knocommerce within Lunar Solar Group, and then broke it out into a separate company. So this was mid 2021. We started looking at, or more late actually, like August, September 2021. We were about to go to market with our main product, and so the reality was that Lunar Solar Group was a great business, but it's really hard to fund an entirely separate business that you want to scale with an existing business. You got to be at very large scale for that to work. And so we just didn't think the economics were going to be there for us to be able to invest the way we wanted to without some other partners. So we looked at raising money. So talked to a bunch of VCs, and at the time, we weren't technically pre-revenue, but we were essentially pre-revenue. We were a few $1,000s a month in revenue. Wasn't a whole lot there from a revenue standpoint. And we had our new platform coming, but I think we had, when we actually launched it publicly in September 2021, we had, I think, 30 merchants on it. So it was very small, and we'll probably hit 3,000 next month.
Wow.
So it's been, yeah, it was very small at the time, right? And so we're talking to investors, and I think there were a couple of things that I picked up from that. One, you, it just didn't feel like a good fit. So I'll just summarize it first by saying that. So raising money didn't feel like a great fit. And for a couple of reasons. One, you either need a plan on how you're going to charge, you need 5-figure ACVs, right? How do you charge somebody ten to $100,000 a month or a year to use your software? So if you're a startup, you need something like that, or you need a massive number of merchants that you can go after, where you have, maybe you're only charging $100 a month, but you have 100,000, like realistically 100,000 potential customers. And then in a context like that, you can actually get to scale where you can figure out what do we do next to get to the unicorn status, because that's ultimately what a VC is looking for, right?
Yeah.
And I just remember I had one conversation with a lady she was awesome. This is not like anything against her, but I have this conversation with her. She's a partner at a VC firm, and she's like, "I love this business. I think you get to $100 million valuation, even if you don't raise money. Like you can pull that off, make it happen. I just don't see how you get to $1 billion." And I was like, well, that's fair, because I don't either. Like, we don't have anything that exists
Yeah.
today that gets us to $1 billion. Like, I don't have any product. I have a vision. I have like what I think will be that product down the road, but I don't have any evidence today that we can make that happen. So that was the kinds of conversations I was having. So there was definitely interest in investing. Obviously, I'd been an entrepreneur for a while. Pearson, who was co-founder and had his agency, and he's a great entrepreneur. So I think there were people who were willing to take a bet, but it just didn't feel right. And so I ended up meeting WeCommerce, which is now Tiny. So at the time, WeCommerce was a small publicly traded company in Canada. They had 6 companies they owned already. So Stamped, 460, Pixel Union. Those are kind of the bigger ones in that ecosystem, but they were doing, I don't remember what it was. I want to say, like, this is probably overestimating. Let's go 50 million a year in revenue, something like that. Architect Names is in there as well. And so good sized business, and they were really interested in what we were building. So we started talking to them in October or November. I think it was end of October. So a little over a month after we launched. And I really, really liked the team. It felt like a good fit. And so the way that I see it, I had a plan and a vision for what I wanted to build, and we sold literally within months of like launching the product. And so to me, that was kind of our seed round, right? Like, that was them bringing us in. The benefit was that the people who'd been investing into it to that point got to keep the money, as opposed to continuing to put it into the business. So there was kind of a nice little win for everybody there. And then it gave them the ability to continue to invest in our business and grow it to the next level. So since then, like, the business has grown a ton. I mean, as I just mentioned, we went from 30-ish merchants on the beta to almost 3,000 now in basically
Congrats.
2 years. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot, a lot of growing pains in that process, for sure. And I feel like, honestly, I'm still trying to figure out most of it. Feels like just kind of like keeping the ship afloat is the goal. But I think we're trying to get into executing on that bigger vision at some point here soon too.
Very cool. I love the new wave is what I want to call my accelerator. So we love all wave and ship references here. Um, but I feel like that's the case with all entrepreneurs. There's not always, it's a day by day thing. The plan is never that clear, and the
Yeah.
decisions that you have to make are not decisions that anybody's really ever prepared for till they're making them. I'm curious, as you were making these decisions, were there people that, I think entrepreneurial isolation is a real thing, and I think
Mhm.
that, I was chatting with John yesterday actually from BattleBox, and he was chatting
Yeah.
about mentors and advisors and peers as well. Are there a group of peers that you go to when you're making these decisions? Are you making them in a silo? Are you chatting with mentors or advisors? Like, what are you just, I think some people run or have different outlets or things that they do to help make these decisions. What is it that helps you get a clear head to make these decisions, and how do you go about that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So pre-acquisition, when we weren't part of Tiny WeCommerce. Um, oh yeah, I didn't touch on that, but WeCommerce is now a division within Tiny, which is a larger company. It's almost $1 billion market cap out of Canada. Andrew Wilkinson and Chris Sparling are co-CEOs of that. So that's kind of added another layer into all this too. But so pre-joining WeCommerce slash Tiny, it was very collaborative. So Pearson and I would work on, we'd talk through any decision. We also had somebody in our business who was a seasoned business person, right? So he I don't want to overage him, but middle aged, right?
Yeah.
He's got grandkids at this point.
He had more experience.
He had a lot more experience, decades more experience than we do, and was a great mentor through a lot of this, right? And then obviously when you have skin in the game, it changes things a little bit too. You're less likely. I actually think there's something really interesting about that. I wonder what would happen if every entrepreneur gave their mentor who's not involved in the business at all just a little cut of it. That's probably not actually a good idea, but it does change. It changes the type of advice you get a little bit, right? Because it's not just about how you are. It's also about this needs to be healthy for the business. So I think he was really good at helping make some, think through things that maybe we wouldn't have thought of, and especially in the acquisition process. He'd been through that multiple times, and so to have somebody on your team who's actually gone through that process is really, really helpful. So that
Was that intentional?
that intentional in what regard?
Like how you said, if everybody had a mentor and advisor that had skin in the game, it would change the advice you get. Is that part of the reason that you brought him on, was for his experience specifically, that you guys were maybe
Yeah,
lacking?
yeah, and he's also a friend. I mean, he was involved in Lunar Solar Group,
Okay.
as he's part of the team there. So there's I don't know. It was very we definitely, our leadership came out of Lunar Solar Group at that point in time, and so a lot of what the decisions that we made were part of that. Um,
So it sounds like networking almost too in all of these ventures that you were embarking on was big, because you were almost able to bring people with you to your new ventures that
for
would
sure,
help
yeah, yeah,
advise.
yep.
And that sounds like it was pretty critical to being able to do what you were able to do.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I guess what I'm ultimately trying to say is at that point in time, it was very collaborative within the shareholders of that business, right? So, if you're a shareholder in the business, I'm interested in what you have to say. And so we did that. We also had some kind of advisors within the ecosystem, customers who I would lean on a lot. So pre-acquisition, that was kind of how it looked. Post-acquisition, I have my direct boss who I report to, who's the CEO of WeCommerce, the division in Tiny. So he and I chat almost every day. It is really nice though. We have, essentially full autonomy as long as we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. From a business growth standpoint, we have a lot of autonomy. And so I'll run things by him, and his answer is always do whatever you think is best. But it's still nice to have somebody who's thinking about the broader health of the business who I can run things by. It's a similar sort of relationship that I had pre-acquisition, right? Where you've got somebody who is outside of the day-to-day, but has a vested interest in the success of the business. And so I think that was that kind of a relationship, I think it is really helpful. And then our leadership team in our company, run things by them. Any sort of decision that we're making, I run it by all of them, and any employees who maybe aren't in leadership but are very closely associated to whatever decision is being made, I'll always get their input, because we're still a pretty small team. So I think we're 11 or 12 full-time people. So makes it relatively easy still to be like, hey, Landon, you're the one who deals with this the most. What's your opinion on this, right? And
I think it's
so,
also important for buy-in. I mean, that's very
yeah,
cool that you do that, that you're making it a kind of a collaborative decision-making process. I think you're seeing that more and more be almost demanded of employees. Like they want to be a part, at least just have a voice, not maybe making the final decision, but I'm guessing that it also increases buy-in into the decisions that are made, and the motivation, or how much people feel like they're a part of that business and that decision-making process. I'm sure you see the results in their work as well.
that's my hope for sure. I think yeah, at the end of the day, like the decision is mine most of the time, and so it's like I'm still gonna do what I think is best. But I do want your opinion, and it may change my mind or it may not. To be honest, most of the time it probably doesn't. But if it if there is something that's really strong and like, okay, yes, that makes sense. Like let's hold on that. So
You're collecting all the data to then make the decision, which a lot of people, I mean, I don't think that all founders do that. I think it's cool to hear the way that you go about that in terms of you're still making the decisions, but you're collecting the data points from everywhere that need to be collected to make the most informed decision that you can make, which is very
yeah,
cool.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like if I'm gonna do something that does change somebody's day-to-day work, if they don't like it or they don't have buy-in, you definitely risk losing that person, right? And sometimes that's what needs to happen in order to make the right moves, but like usually it's not. So it's best to actually, like to your point, just get buy-in. So yeah, and then running things by customers, we still do a lot of that too. So
Very
and
cool.
again, that's another thing. Like we don't. It's not necessarily that the customer dictates what we do, but I want to know what they think about it. And if they, if I put something in front of a bunch of customers and they hate it, then we're probably not going to do it. So
That's smart. Have you seen an impact? Like, what is your employee retention like?
um, it's quite high. We've only had two in the history of our business. We've only had two people leave.
And
So
how long have you guys been around?
um, well, 3 years, really like
That's amazing.
a year and a half of like 2 years actually of like no, sorry, year and a half really of like scaling our team. So I would say that's probably the time window I would use. But yeah, and call it the last year and a half, we've had two people leave, and so yeah, I think it's been pretty good.
That's really amazing. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of companies struggle with, and it sounds like what you're doing is working in terms of retention, which I listened to. It was interesting. It was at e-commerce experience evolution. Kevin O'Leary gave a talk, and it was like a very good talk. But he talked about startups. One of their biggest risks is having, somebody vital early on churn or leave
Mm,
internally as an employee. So that type of retention is really impressive, and I'm guessing that the way your decision making is going into that as well. The other thing I'm curious about from what you were talking about, though, is it sounds like this being acquired early on and taking this route, you've almost, compared to other entrepreneurs I've talked to, you have a strong internal network around decision making and people that are really helping you. I've worked for SaaS companies and have a lot of friends that have worked for SaaS companies.
mm,
When they go the VC funding route, I think everybody kind of knows that they don't get that kind of advising, even though people do have skin in the game from their investors. Was that a big part of your decision making? And when you were making that choice, is that something you were thinking about?
yeah, I wouldn't say it was like front of mind, but I do think that that's like I am comfortable making decisions. I don't have any issues with that. I love making decisions. If I'm not at least in the room majorly contributing to a decision, I won't stay at a workplace. And like,
Well, you're a founder. That makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
So like in that context, I always want to be like I want to have a voice and be the one, ideally the one actually like saying yes or no on something, right? Um, but I do also really, really value collaboration. And so I think in that context, I I would rather not be in a position where I feel like I'm alone
The
and
support system, yeah. I mean, it seems amazing. Compare. I've heard multiple founders really struggle with this of who to go to when they're making these types of decisions or who to just ask for advice. Like, not to make the decision for them, but um, I don't think very many people have you gave so many names and you have so many people when you're doing that you have to turn to, which I think is very cool and is noticeably different from SaaS companies and a lot of companies that I've talked to that have accepted VC type funding.
yeah, that's good to I actually really appreciate you sharing that perspective too, because I feel like I don't maybe value that the way I should sometimes. So thank you for also mentioning that.
Yeah, of course, of course. Do you have a good community of founders that you chat with as well, or peers in that, or have you struggled to find? I mean, I'm wondering. I'm guessing like Stamped and the other companies; those were kind of immediate friends or
Yeah.
acquaintances that you chatted with as well. Do you have like a good peer network in the founder community?
Yeah, that's an um, interesting problem, for lack of a better term. I think in the context of like WeCommerce, it is really great because there's 6 other companies that we can interact with in some capacity or another. And so I know the CEOs of all those companies. We're in a Slack group together. We chat sometimes. But I think the hard part about being a founder is that you're so busy that you don't, well, at least in my experience, all the founders I know, will I can't tell you how many times I've like entered into like a Slack group or started a group chat or something, and then it lasts for a week, and then everybody's so busy with their own things that like it just doesn't hold together. I know there are like executive coaching groups and some of those sorts of organizations out there where you pay to participate, and so in that context, you're probably a little bit more inclined to participate. But I do think that, in the context of like I'll just use the specific space we're in. It's e-commerce enablement SaaS, right? So it's Klaviyo. The big ones are Klaviyo, Gorgeous. Um, I guess like Tapcart, Postscript, right? So there's like the set of companies that are kind of like the biggest ones in the space, right? Um, and that kind of defines the space. There's not a whole lot, like there's a lot of smaller companies too, but like it's a pretty small space. Like you'll see somebody on Twitter or I guess X now, and they're at one company, and then a month later they're at another company in the space, and like you already know the people at each company, and so in a context like that where you're in a pretty small ecosystem, I think there's a lot of you're like always 1 degree of separation away from your competitors, and some people are more concerned about that than others, but I think that does to some extent limit the knowledge sharing and some of the things that happen where it's like, okay, I'll talk to this one person because I trust them, but I don't know if I want to be in a group of 10 other founders, because they're probably like one of them is going to be friends with a competitor, right? And so I think, not that I don't necessarily feel that way, but I think that that's probably part of what limits some of the collaboration. So in my experience, it definitely has felt like you kind of have to venture out of like the ecosystem in order to really feel like there's a lot of honesty and knowledge sharing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good perspective. It's interesting. I was part of, it's called Outbound Squad, but it's similar to the groups that you're talking about for sales reps. And there were actually competitors in Outbound Squad. I mean, their whole thing was it's not a zero-sum game. Like there's
Yeah,
enough business
for
out
sure.
there for everyone, but it limits in the coaching calls what you want to bring up and the name of the deal that you're working and the fact that they're buying sometimes. But they did do a good job of curating it. And I will say that like what I've noticed, because I didn't start out in the e-commerce space, like the first software company I was at was selling into higher ed, and then I trickled into the e-commerce space, and I noticed very quickly how small the e-commerce space is as
Mhm.
well. But the thing that Outbound Squad did really well was they were really truly cross industry. So even though there was occasionally a couple people from like competitors in there, they had a much larger group of people that you were selling like, from medical sales to tech sales to like just all kinds of different like construction, insurance, like there was just so many different and there was a lot of cross pollination of like ideas across industries and stuff. That's something that I think about a lot in terms of expanding out of the e-commerce space and finding groups like that where you can actually collaborate outside of that because I see that a lot in the e-commerce space as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like there's also the reality too is like most things aren't that hard to build. At least like a prototype. It's the scaling of something that's challenging. And so like you see all the time, like a company will be, they're working with a company. I mean, this has happened to us multiple times. You got a partner who is doing this one thing, and you're working with them because you kind of have like products that work together, and then they just build like a version of what you offer. And that's just to be expected on some level. But I do think that like the fact that it's relatively easy to the competition is constantly shifting, the things that you're working on are constantly shifting. I think it does just like naturally put up some more guards that maybe wouldn't exist otherwise. So
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. The thing that I'm thinking about as we're talking is there's almost two folds to this because there's like the business partnerships and the guards that you're putting, like you have to put sometimes there. It's just the reality of business. But then there's also like a personal aspect to this of sometimes these people are also your friends. And I know that there's a lot of cross-pollination in that for, I don't know, I struggle with it. I think a lot of founders struggle with it when you work a lot. There's not that many people that can like relate to the experiences that you have if you're entrepreneurial and doing these types of things and the general population in general. And so you start to hang out with founders. Like, I'm curious, how has that affected you like personally at all, if it has, in terms of, yes, there's this business stuff, but then does that make it hard to have like a peer group of really just friends outside of that, or have you been able to separate those things?
Yeah, I separate them quite a bit, honestly. I like my wife understands pretty well what I do, but most of the other people in my life outside of work don't really. And I think I'm okay with that. I think that's
Really?
probably the case for a lot of people, right? Like, I don't know. Um, Years ago, I don't do this now because I realize it just sounds kind of stupid. But I used to like joke that I was unemployed because I was self-employed. And
Yeah.
so like people would be like, "What do you do for work?" I'm like, "I'm unemployed." Uh, or I'd say something like, "I build the internet." Like it's just something extremely vague. So I'm a little bit more
Yeah.
specific now than I used to be. But and like I actually work with brands that people know now, so that's kind of cool too, right? So it's like
Hmm.
we have a lot of brands we work with that are basically household names. So I can pull up a list of if somebody's like, "What do you like? Tell me, explain what you do." I can list off a name of a list of 5 or 10 brands, and they definitely know at least a couple of those brands. So that's made it feel like it's a little easier to explain what I do. But I think yeah, it's just different, right? Like honestly speaking, I don't have a whole lot of a social life anymore outside of work. A lot of that's because I have small children, and so it's kind of like stage of life too. But between like small children and the startup, that's kind of all I do. I mean, I literally did the math one time, and it's 100 hours a week of time spent on those two things, right?
Wow.
Uh, and so like that's and only half of that's my work. The rest of it's children. That's how much time children take up. So it's just like it's an interesting, it's just a phase of life. And I think that's probably going to be the case for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so I've kind of just, I'm learning to embrace that because I was very social before the pandemic, basically. And that's when I also started having children. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I would say
You're in
like,
a whole new kind of season of life right now. Has
yeah.
that, like, does that make you, is that all upsides, or are there times, like, are there things, times that you do miss that, or friend, like, I do think it's interesting, sorry, that you keep those things separate, because I hear different answers on that, and I actually struggle with it myself. Like, I'm like, how separate should I keep these things? I need to stop mixing, like, business and personal so much.
Mhm.
But then also they're the people that you're spending so much time with, and they do become your friends. So
Mhm.
I'm curious, like, first off, I guess, if that was intentional that you have kept those things separate, or if that's something that you learn, like, you have a lot of experience in launching these different businesses. Were there times that you mixed those things and it didn't go as well, and so you've now like learned to keep these things separate? And then the second question off of that is just this balance that you have 100 hours a week. I mean, they're two very different things at least. And do you still,
Yeah.
are you feeling fulfilled from those things? Is it just this season is that, and that's something that you're okay with and fulfilled with?
Yeah. Good questions. Okay, so on the like the time thing, yeah. So I'll tell you what a day is like. So a day for me is like I get up around like between 6:30 and 7 is when like the kids get up. So sometimes I'll wake up and get some stuff done before they do, or other times I'm just tired and I just get up when the kids do. I don't really have like, and this is something maybe I should work on, but I don't have strong routines, especially having we've had 2 kids, and our oldest is turning 3 this month. So
Congrats.
we have 2 children under 3 right now. And basically the first like 6 months of their lives is just like total life derailment, right? Like there's no like between the startup and just like trying to like get through every night. I don't think about routines. I don't think about anything like that. I just kind of like get through it. And so uh then it takes a few months to kind of like get back to normal. So like with our oldest, when she was about 1, I feel like is when I had about a year there where I felt pretty good. I was kind of in a groove. So I'm now second time around also kind of getting back into a groove again. I started working out again for a little bit, and then we had another baby. So things like that, where it's like I just don't like I don't plan exercise really. I don't have like, daily like meditation or reading or like those kinds of things just don't exist right now in my life, and not in a consistent sort of way, right? So I think that's one thing that's been I don't know if it's challenging. Like I don't feel like I need those things to function, where I know a lot of people feel like they need that kind of consistency and rhythm. But I do think it can be helpful, right? And so
Hmm.
I think for me, like a day is like I get up, I start with the kids, I drop the kids off at daycare. If they're going to daycare, some days my wife stays home with them as well. And then I start working, probably about 8:30. I work until I go pick them up. Uh, then it's like kid time until 8:30 at night. And then oftentimes I'm not quite done with what I want to do. So I'll work for another half hour to hour and a half. So it's usually like, sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. I'm done with whatever I need to do for the day. And then I go to bed. And that's what my weekdays look like. Weekends are kind of the same, except that like I'm not at work, so I'll have, they nap for a couple hours in the afternoon, so sometimes I'll do a little bit during then if I need to catch up on stuff. Um, but otherwise, I'll just try to relax a little bit. So it's 14 to 16 hour days on a weekday and like 12-ish hour days on weekends. Basically, is kind of how I look at it. So um, I don't want to
Wow.
look at my kids as work, but it kind of is, right? It's not like I just get to like relax and read a book and
Well, and he says it with a smile on his face. That's the thing I'm amazed by. Is just the way that you're so casually talking about it, or you're just accepting the way that it is. I think that that's like a very cool acceptance, that
it's
you've
been a
almost just
process
accepted.
to get to that point though, and I can't say I'm there every single day either. So yeah, it's not a it's
What
definitely
that
not.
process look like have there were there things that helped you to get to that acceptance point, or like points in time that you can remember where like you were struggling with it more? Like what's the thing that
Yeah,
you do to get your head right when you're trying to get
yeah,
to a point where you're as happy about it as you are now?
yeah. I mean, it's all about expectations, right? So I think that's something that like it makes so much sense when I'm thinking about it, but when I'm not thinking about it, I sometimes forget. But if I expect that my day looks like spending, if my expectation is that all I'm gonna do between 6:30 in the morning and 9 o'clock at night is kids and work, then I'm not disappointed if that's how my day looks, which is probably how it's gonna look, right? Um, and so I think that's like one, I just had to learn that that was the new normal. And so like once I learned that that was the new normal and that nothing I do really changes that, then I kind of got to a point where like where that becomes the expectation. And so when that's what every day looks like, it's not a big deal. I think what's hard is when I expect that I'm going to have time. So like one of the things that's really challenging for me is when a kid is homesick. So like if I have to take a day off because one of our kids is homesick, that's really challenging for me. I have a really hard time with that because my expectations for that day had been destroyed. So I had plans of what I wanted to do. Maybe I had important meetings I wanted to attend. Whatever those things are, my expectation has been shifted. And when there's not much margin to like to put that time into to move those tasks and those things that I wanted to into a different set of time, then it can be really challenging. So that's a harder one for me. I really struggle with that sometimes, and it's okay if it's like one day here or there. But like we went through a season of, I think I had 14 straight weeks last year, so 2022, where I didn't work a full week because of like
Oh my goodness.
travel or our daughter being sick. And it was like post COVID, like everybody's, not wearing masks anymore, everybody's going back to normal life. And our daughter was literally sick like 10 times in 3 months. Um, and
That's
so
so tough.
it was brutal. It was literally like she would she'd go to daycare, get sick, then be home the next week because she was sick, then
I
go
mean, I'm
back.
sure you guys were getting sick because when you
Yeah,
have kids
we're
in
getting
daycare that
sick.
are bringing it home, then you're
Yeah.
ending up sick.
And like in the middle of startup stuff too, right? Like losing a like it's not like the work goes away if you don't show up to work. It just compounds. And so I think to me that's the hardest thing is that kind of stuff. where it's one thing when you expect that that days are gonna be long and all that, but when then all the things you've tried to pack into that get disrupted, then it becomes really challenging. So I don't know if that
A
answers all.
little random thing for you. You can use it or take it or not. I wrote, based on an advisor's advice, actually, like a personal manifesto, which is really just like a list of affirmations, but one that is like literally my whole goal is to get it into my subconscious, and it must be working because I keep hearing the line, which is I value experiences over expectations. And so
Mm,
every time something like that happens to me, that's like what I start to tell myself is
yeah,
like, I'll start saying it like in an airport in the middle of a canceled flight or anything in my head. It's like I value experiences over
yeah,
expectations. I value experiences over expectations. And
yeah.
so if you ever want to use that nugget, you're welcome to use it because I think
No,
it's something that I
yeah,
struggle with as well.
yeah, I love that because I mean the flip side of that then is that like let's say one of my kids is homesick. That's actually an amazing time for me to get to hang out with them, and like I don't know, they're always way more cuddly and want to like they actually want me when they're sick. When they're not sick, they're a little bit more like, I'm good, Dad. I'm gonna do my own thing. Um,
Yeah. Well, they're only little for so long. I mean, I don't have kids, but I've done a lot of nannying. So, and I do think that that like small affirmation, like it almost resets you to that like mindset that you're like, okay, like I wasn't meant to get to this place today. I wasn't meant to do this thing today. It can always be rescheduled, and people always understand stuff like that. But I think,
yeah,
especially as founders and entrepreneurs, you have very high expectations of yourself as well. And so sometimes it can be hard to like let those things go. And so I've found
yeah,
that
and
line in life.
that's a really good point too. Like almost always you care more about it than the people who you are canceling on or not getting the thing done that you're told them you're going to get done or whatever those things are. Like usually you care a lot more about that than those people do. And they're totally understanding of the fact that you just can't make it today.
Yeah. I want to pivot here for a second. I know that you've been taking more of your calls, like we were talking about this last time we
Yeah.
chatted, and I started doing the same thing while you're walking and talking. Has that made an impact on like the number of hours that you're working? Is that like one of the tangible things that you've maybe done that helps not make it so monotonous? And are you still
Yeah.
doing that and are you still seeing it work?
Yeah, definitely. So I like as I was mentioning just a moment ago, like I don't have like working out built into my schedule. It just isn't something that I feel like I have the bandwidth for right now. So like that's a really tangible, easy way for me to A, like just get a change of scenery and then B, actually move and get a little bit of exercise. So I've found that walking is like if I had to pick one activity to do for the rest of my life for general health, it would be walking. I think that's probably like not that it's maybe like there's other things you should do as well, but like if you could only do one thing, walking is just about as good as you can get. So I'll take it. So
Well,
that's
I noticed the same thing, and like I have ADHD,
yes,
and I know a lot of entrepreneurs. Yeah, like it's something like 30% and 1% of the population, and
yeah,
30% of entrepreneurs that
right,
have ADHD. And so the other thing that you're doing, and I learned this on a Huberman episode, and I probably won't get it quite as perfect as he did, but your eyes are moving side to side when you're walking, and you're naturally taking in more stimuli. So it's
mm,
actually also like naturally soothing, especially for somebody with ADHD to walk and talk.
yeah,
Like I notice if I'm unclear or I'm not making sense on the phone or on a call, if I get up and start walking and
yes,
talking, I actually start to become clearer in what I'm
yes.
saying, which I think is pretty insane.
I have the same thing. Like you're actually gonna have a better conversation with me if I'm walking, because like if I'm sitting in front of a computer, my inclination, like I'm looking for that, right? Like I might be fidgeting a little bit. Like you may not see it, or you may notice. Uh, I might be looking around. I might be like looking at something. Like a Slack notification pops up, and I don't
Hmm.
understand why this is, but for some reason I have my notifications muted and they still come through. But like, there's all those kinds of things where it's like there's so much that is like I'm drawn to and distraction in that context. Where if I'm up and walking, it's like driving a car. Like I can talk while I'm driving a car. There's no
Your
there.
full focus is kind of on that
Yeah.
conversation as
Mhm.
opposed to when you're. No, I
Yep.
definitely experienced the same thing. Are there any other like tips or tricks like that that you do? Like, because to me, you said you don't have working out built into your schedule, but in a way, you kind of do, right? Like you've incorporated it into your schedule in a
Yeah.
very healthy way, I think. Are there any other like things that you've done to your schedule, especially in this time, like since you've had the two kids and you've been so busy with the
Yeah.
startup, that you've seen make an impact on like your ability to work that amount of time and almost accept it the way you're accepting it?
Yeah. So with the kids, like the again, like on a like an expectations thing, or I feel like the experiences versus expectations concept here makes is even more important. Um, One of the things that I've done a lot is tried to incorporate that into activities with the kids. So, like maybe we go on an evening walk, or we go to the park. Because like the other thing I've learned about having kids is they are awake and they're doing their thing regardless of what you're doing. So you can either like you can either try to fight it, or you can just like go enjoy it as much as you can and like participate and be a part of that. And so I think for me that's been another thing where it's like, okay, maybe I want to work on something, but I'm actually better off just like wearing my kids out and letting them have an extra 30-minute nap, and I can actually focus on something for 30 minutes than trying to like get something done while I'm with them. And I would say that's still like something I'm working on. But that's been a big thing, is just like incorporating activity into the things that I'm doing with them. So I'd
Sounds
say,
like you're also very present in whatever it is you're doing. Like you're either with your kids or you're working rather than trying
yeah,
to do both alongside each other, which I
I
think
definitely
is
try to be, but those moments, like those, those sick days and things like that, where it's like, okay, I
have
really,
one kid somewhere and you're on the laptop in the other
yeah,
hand. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has those, but I do think it sounds like you're doing a very good job
oh, thank
of
you.
being present,
I definitely
which is
try.
cool.
So yeah,
It's
now
cool
that
to
I'm,
hear that you're thinking about it. I don't think a lot of people are even thinking about it. So, like, I think you're a step ahead for that.
I appreciate that.
The last question that I have for you is if you had one tip for entrepreneurs or somebody who like wanted to follow in your
Mhm.
footsteps, what's the tip that you would give?
Um, I would say, and this is thinking about it in the context of more of like a technology SaaS sort of business. I don't know that this is necessarily applicable to all forms of entrepreneurship, but I would say my big tip would be don't worry about like building $1 billion company or something like that, right? Like when I was 20, I was like, I'm gonna be a billionaire by the time in my 30s. I'm in my 30s, and there's zero way I'm gonna be a billionaire before I'm 40. And so there was just this idea, though, that like you had to go big, you had to do something crazy impressive. But I actually think that the most like the thing that my thinking has really shifted around is like what does it look like to make an impact every single day, and like let that just kind of take care of itself. And how does that, if you just show up every single day and you do your best and you try to solve real problems for people, I think that naturally, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, you're going to get to the sort of outcome you want. And the reality is that money is not the best outcome anyway. Like there's only so much money you can spend. And I think like having fulfillment in what you do and enjoying what you do is worth more than money ultimately. And that's easy to say when you don't have money, I suppose, because I've never had that had that
Well,
experience.
I love that tip. So there's a Teddy Roosevelt quote. This is another thing I actually tell
Okay.
myself a lot, which is do what you can where you are with what you have. And
Yes.
anytime I feel like the mountain's too big, like that's what I tell myself. Like I remember there was one day I text my friend Sarah and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I was like very existential, like life.
Yeah.
And she texts me back and she says, I thought you were going to that happy hour. And I'm just like, that is not what I meant, but wow, that actually really helped me. And she's like, I know, I was channeling you. And it's just like, I think about that a lot when I'm like, the mountain feels so big. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of entrepreneurs. And you have like people's livelihoods that you're like, you at this point on your shoulders and all of these kind of like burdens that you bear. But it's like, you really can only do what you can where you are with what you have, which I think
Yeah.
was very embodied in your answer. The other thing that's interesting, I know I said that was the last question, but now I have one more thing I want to talk about.
Hmm.
And I've seen you post about this on LinkedIn a little bit as well, and it's something that I think I can relate to. is like what you said about money. I always joke that I don't have what most people are terrified to lose,
Mhm.
or I like have never had, or and I'm not disparaging. There's like all of these different backgrounds and there's all of these different values to what it is that you bring to the table. But there are certain advantages that I've noticed very present, like apparently in the corporate space and in the tech space, that other people have that were not advantages that I were given, like
Yep.
was given. I don't have an MBA. I went to a D2 school that nobody's heard of. My family's not in tech. They actually don't even know what it is that I do. They're a bunch of school
Yeah.
teachers. And so is this something that you think helps you, like, how do you think that that gives you an advantage in business, or do you think that that's somewhat to credit for the way that you've been able to, like, almost accept all
Yeah.
of these different things that come up and that life's not perfect?
Yeah. I saw something on tw Twitter X a couple weeks ago that I thought was really interesting, and it was somebody who was talking about how I don't want to get too detailed here, but essentially like grew up around money but never had as much as everybody else did, and primary goal of starting a business is to have more than those other people did. And I'm like, that's just not, I think that sets you up for failure, right? Like, I think that's when you take shortcuts. I think that's when you do things that are borderline illegal, maybe, because you're looking to,
Or
like, it's about,
unethical?
or unethical, right? Because, like, it's about the
Yeah.
money. And so I think, like, anytime money is the primary objective, I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous for you, the person who that's your objective. I think it's dangerous for your customers. I think it's dangerous for your partners, because the reality is that not like the right thing to do or the best thing for the long-term future isn't always correlated to the money. Like there's not always an obvious tie between money and making that decision. And so to me, it really is about like, what is the, I care about making money, but to me, it's more of like a validation for what I'm doing, if that makes sense. Like if, I
And
suppose
what do
that,
you think gave you that perspective? Like, do you think it is your background or anything to do with that, or just things that
yeah,
you've learned?
I think so. I think it's, I'm also, I mean, I don't talk about this a ton, but I'm a religious person. So I think it's like partially that. I think it's like, I kind of have this idea that everybody's equal at the end of the day. Like we're all, like all of us are just humans, and there's not really uh, the things that you achieve and the things that you do on Earth don't really matter at the end of the day. Like we're all gonna die. What matters most is how did you treat people? What kind of how are people going to remember you? And like did you love people well and care about people well? Because that's the only thing to me. That's the only thing that really matters beyond this life that we live. And you could argue like Steve Jobs. We all know who he is and care about him, but there's I don't know, a handful of names in the history of the world where that's the case, and you're probably not going to be on that list of people who impacted the world in some way, where 100 years later people are remembering them. But you might build something that changes people's lives because of the way that you treated them, and so that's kind of the way that I think about it. And the reality is, like, I build software. Nobody cares about the software that I build. Like, it's just like the honest truth. I don't look at like what I'm doing is not revolutionizing anything. Like, does it help somebody in their business? Does it give them more insight and better understanding of their customers, all that kind of stuff? Yes, it absolutely does. But like, if my business doesn't exist, they're gonna go find another way to do what they need to do. So I can make their life easier, I can do it better, but I'm not changing their life. And so like, how can I actually treat people in such a way that does impact their life? So that's the like the thing that I think about in everything I do. And I think that's why like in 10 years I probably won't be in software. I'll probably be doing something else, and it's for that reason. So not that I think there's anything wrong with software, but I think that um, I want to be in a position where I have the maximum impact on the livelihood of people. So That's the way I think
That's
about
so cool. Well, and this is a perfect way to end the podcast because the whole reason I started this podcast, and I'm glad we had this conversation, is like, I just think you have so many people talking about such technical things and
it. Mhm. Yep.
product and company and technical things. Nobody's talking about the people behind the businesses. Like, and there's so much to these like journeys of founders and who these people are as people that is not something that's a hard skill on paper or something in a spreadsheet for revenue that actually goes into being able to do this task. And I value people just as people. Like I love chatting with people about,
For sure.
like I learn so much from people about decision making and mentors and advisors and how they think about things and all these different like soft skills that are just not being like talked about as much. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective because I think it honestly provides so much insight to so much that we talked about throughout the whole podcast into how you're able to have the mentality that you're able to have. Before we sign off, is there anything else that you want to add or say to?
I just want to say thanks. It's really awesome to chat with you. I know we've chatted multiple times, but
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll keep chatting.
yeah, for sure. I appreciate your perspective. I love you pulling some of the stuff out too, because I feel like it's not stuff that I talk about a lot. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.